You're listening to the Live from the Caribbean podcast, the show that brings the stories of island people making a global impact, with your host, Pauline Joseph.
I am Pauline Joseph, the host of Live from the Caribbean. As you guys know, the premise of this show is to have a discussion with Caribbean people making a global impact. And today I have with me Resa, who she is in a place that I wouldn't even think about jumping on a plane to get to. And I don't even want to do her introduction Miss Justice. Just created a win there. So Resa, can you share with everybody where you are at this present moment?
Well, like you, Pauline, I never dreamt any time in my life I would end up here. So don't worry, it's also part of my story. But yes, so I'm in Israel right now. I've lived here for the last 13 years. So I left Trinidad in 2007, April the 1st, because I remember it was April Fool's Day very clearly. So I was thinking, is this a trick? Am I actually going to travel halfway across the land to the world to somewhere I've never been to? But this is it. So I'm here, and it's been a really interesting ride, but I love it. I always tell people, especially my mother, who's always worrying about me out here, I say to her, listen, I'm in the best place in the world that you could ever think of. So don't worry, I'm really good.
And I think that's such a great introduction. Like, anybody who's listening now is just ready to be like, okay, I'm not getting out of the car. I'm not finishing what I'm doing in the kitchen. I just want to hear this story because, as I was telling the LinkedIn Local crew, I'm actually excited to learn more about you. And for those who may not know, I manage the LinkedIn Local events in Trinidad. And I actually... Resa, I think I added you or you added me on LinkedIn. I don't know. Which one was it? It doesn't matter.
I added you because we have a common friend, Jamila Cross, right? But I did, add you before. And then Jamila kind of connected us because she does a triathlon with you when you guys train. So this is how we all got connected all over again.
I know, isn't it amazing? Because when you connect with me, I just remembered you in the back of my head because I do this with just about most of my podcast guests. When I see the person, I just remember, I say, okay, when I'm ready for you, I'm going to reach out to you and give you a call. And I remember running with my teammate Jamila, and we were discussing about tech, and she was exploring some of the things she wanted to do. She's like, yeah, I have this friend out of Israel, and I was like, what? What's her name? When she told me, I was like, OMG, I know her.
Yes,
So
I know. How many? First of all, there are only 2 Trinidadians living in Israel, so 3 actually. So if you know somebody in Israel, it has to be one of us. So it's very easy to know who's who.
And not saying Trinidadians are like salt, they're everywhere. I feel like you are proof in the pudding right now.
Exactly, right? We are not really everywhere. It's true. It's just because Israel is a very difficult place to immigrate to. It's not like United States that basically welcomes everyone. They put a lot of blocks for you not to be here if you're not Jewish. So not everybody can stomach this process, let's say.
Well, let's get into that. Let's get into what do you do right now? What is your job and where do you work?
Yeah, so I own a Hubspot agency. So we are a Hubspot agency partner. And Hubspot, for those who do not know, it's like a marketing automation platform that really helps, startups mostly and mid-sized companies do all of their email marketing and any type of online marketing activities that they wish to do. So it's like one of the top 3 marketing automation platforms in the world. And they have thousands of partners all over the world. So in Israel, there are 27 partners, and we are one of the number 2 companies in Israel. So we are basically serving startup companies, industrial companies, manufacturing medical devices, helping them set up all of their marketing and sales operations in this platform and doing all of their marketing and sales campaigns as well.
Wow. So you mentioned earlier that there are only 2 other Trinidadians. Are there other Caribbean people there as well that you have met?
Yeah, There are Jamaicans, so all the Caribbean people have a very close knit, right? Because there are very few of us. So there's a handful of Jamaicans, because Jamaicans, they are the salt of the earth. Okay, you can find them everywhere. So there are about 5 or 6 or even more. I've lost count because I don't really track all of them. But they've been here a pretty long time, like 30 years and stuff. But Jamaicans, they keep their culture, so they still have that twang, and they still loud, and most of them are singers as well in the music industry, because of course everywhere they love reggae. So reggae is big in Israel. So one of them actually leads the reggae scene. His name is Tony Ree. So he leads the reggae scene in Israel. And then there are a couple from Suriname that I have met, and just dots of other countries. There's a guy from St. Lucia as well, but his parents are from St. Lucia, but he grew up in London. So there are a couple of us, but it's really a handful, a very, very small knit community. And most of us came here because we married an Israeli. So it's not that we picked up ourselves and decided Israel is the place to move to. We all came here because of love or marriage or something of the sort.
So you're telling me Israel is the place you find yourself when you're in love?
Well, actually, I always tell my girlfriends back home who are still single, if you are single, you need to get an Israeli man. I'm sorry to say, they're like the best fathers. They suck as partners sometimes. Hopefully this is only staying in Caribbean, so they wouldn't hear me say this. But they aren't the best partners, but they are the best fathers. So the thing is, if you want to have kids and you don't really want to be all involved, you see why it is I have such a busy career, is because the fathers of my kids are like so involved. I barely have to do anything for my kids. So it's a perfect arrangement. So I always tell my single girlfriends, when you're ready to have kids, come, I'll hook you up with an Israeli guy. The only thing you have to be willing to compromise is to raise your kids Jewish. So.
Oh, well, I'll make a note of that on my Tinder profile for future reference. Noted.
Sure. Exactly.
So let's get into your work, right? So how did you go about, how did you get where you are with Hubspot? How come I guess you said you were a part of this business. When did it start? Where did it all begin?
Okay, so we'll have to go to the very beginning for you to understand this story. So I came to Israel in 2007, as I said. And I'm like, okay, I left a really good job back in Trinidad. I used to work for the Ministry of National Security before. So I was doing pretty well. So when I came to Israel and I checked out the scene, first of all, Hebrew is the official language. So they don't really speak English. So any job you want to have in Israel, you have to speak Hebrew, basically. And my job back home was an economist, a statistician/economist for the Ministry of National Security. So I'm like, okay, how do I ever use that skill in Israel? And the only thing I realized I had was English, because of course, Israel being a relatively small country, their market is mostly to the United States and to Europe. So there are many businesses are very interested in hiring native English speakers to do any type of communication they need, because, if you hear Israelis speak Hebrew, English, it's like translation directly, which gets very rough. So they don't have the nuances of politeness and, a simple thing like asking please or making small talk. They don't get that. So they do need the native English speakers to have their businesses run more efficiently. So the first job I had was teaching. I got into teaching first. It was at an international school. I taught in English, but I taught math and science. And then I did that for like a year, but then I realized Israeli kids are too spoiled. I will end up in a jail if I continue this job. So I looked for an office position, and I ended up going to an interview with a company that was doing a lot of marketing, and they worked with big companies like Motorola and Apple, internationally. And what they did was the digital point of sale displays for those companies in their store. So creating their in-store experiences, really. So I was the only native English speaker in the company. So my role grew and expanded pretty quickly. So I became the account manager for, working with companies like Motorola, as I said. And my job was basically to, transform and do all the project management from creation in China, because we did all of we did the design and everything in Israel, but all the manufacturing and everything was done in China. And then we would export it all over the world to the different locations that Motorola would have stores, which was mostly the US and North America and some in Europe as well. And I did that job for 8 years and I loved it. But, I saw that there was a declining trend for in-store experiences and that digital marketing was picking up more and more. So I used to just, because my job was, in Israel, you work practically a 10 to 11 hour day. So I had to be in the office between 9 to 6. But, my calls with China would be in the early morning. So I would get up at like 5 a.m. and have my calls with China. And then I had to wait for North America to wake up at 4 p.m. my time. So I had this gap in between in my day sometimes. And I had a couple hours and I would go and Google and look for online trends. And I eventually came across HubSpot. And HubSpot, when they started their company, they were very, very good at, educating and giving you a lot of knowledge. So they had an academy and you can do these certificates for free and eventually qualify and understand how their platform works and at the same time understand how to do digital marketing campaigns. So I love this and I soaked it up. So for like about 6 months, I just did every certificate I came across as much as I could. I read every blog they had, downloaded every white paper, read that. And then I updated my LinkedIn profile just by chance after I got these certificates. And suddenly companies were calling me and asking me, hey, HubSpot, could you come and help us set up HubSpot? And I was like, okay, I don't really know this platform, but I'm Trinidadian, so I can bluff my way through anything. So I said to them, sure, I'll come and, do it. So suddenly I found myself having all of these part-time jobs where I would go into companies and set up HubSpot. Now, mind you, I knew nothing about HubSpot in the beginning. So what I had to do was rely a lot on their customer support. So I would be dialing HubSpot's customer support service and asking them questions to actually help me set up the platform or do whatever problems they had. And then I decided, okay, I really liked how this is going and I see the potential of growth as more and more companies were using the platform in Israel. And I decided to volunteer my services to agencies. So the next step was to find companies or agencies that were representing HubSpot in the market. And I called up a couple of them and I said, hey, I've done a couple of certificates, I've done some implementations, and I'd really like to learn more. So could I volunteer my time to work with you for free? You don't have to pay me anything, but you just have to be patient with me learning more on the job. So I did that. I left my full-time job and I volunteered for like a month or two. It wasn't long before they offered me a full-time position, seeing my abilities. So, but to get the job, I had to volunteer for free. And once I got employed, that was it, So from the time I got employed with the agencies, this was about 5-6 years ago. And I worked with them for a couple years, 3 years into it. And then I decided to start my own agency because I realized that, I could do this really well. And again, my motive for starting my agency was to provide a different angle of service because I saw that, companies wanted to have a little bit more what I called autonomy, meaning that they wanted to own the process and not really rely on an agency all the time. And I wanted to give them that option and flexibility, which most agencies weren't trying to do because they wanted the retainers and they wanted, that constant cash coming in. Which makes sense, of course, because as an agency, you have to figure out how to keep your business surviving. So, but I thought, I'm a charity loving person, so I'm going to give away my time for free. So I started this company on that premise of I just want to help people basically. And this was it. 2 years ago, I started Cacao Media. And before you know it, in less than a year, we became a platinum agency, which is like the second highest tier at the time in HubSpot. And then we also became number 2 in the market. So the agency that I worked with initially also called me and begged me to, they offered me to buy me out because they were like, okay, we didn't expect you to be that successful. So it was quite, strange,
Wow.
but in the end, it was like, this has been our success so far.
That's amazing. Kudos to you because, people don't see the hard work, and that sounds like a lot of work. And
It was.
Pauline here to let you know about Microsoft 365. As a small business owner, It's been very challenging to, look for sales, increase your clientele. But one thing I am sure of is my business has to be housed in a cloud solution. Not only does it assist with my bottom line and rent expense, but it allows me to track the productivity of my team members. You need to go check it out. Microsoft 365. You will not regret it.
Talking about working for free, I felt like I was listening to a mirror, if that's a terminology I can use, because I had a similar experience, working on Microsoft platforms and, providing a service, but calling Microsoft just to confirm, because it sounds like you became an accidental entrepreneur. Is that the case?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was very much so, because sometimes I sit here and I'm pulling out my hair and I'm like, why am I doing this? It's not for me. But, one of my bigger visions as well for why I started the agency was I really realized that there was an opportunity where minorities will not necessarily get the access to these Israeli companies. And Israel is like the second Silicon Valley. They actually call them Silicon Wadi, right? Which is the Middle Eastern term for them. So they have such an amazing startup culture, but they're a very, very closed community. Outsiders will not necessarily get to work with them, especially, minorities like myself. So to be the only Black non-Jewish woman, that's like 3 X's already on me. Wow. And thriving in this country, it's not easy. But I wanted to create that space because I met a group of girls from Kenya who were studying in Israel, and they became really good friends, and I used to mentor them. And when they left, I was like, I have to do something for these girls. They're so brilliant, but they would not have the same opportunities out of Kenya that Israel could afford them, and they couldn't just stay in Israel. So I kind of started my agency to offer them a job so they can, start working with me, and I can expose them to these companies as well and give them that foothold. So they're still working with me to this day. They've gone on to study their masters. They're now studying their masters in Poland for digital marketing and stuff. But, my goal is always to continue working with them and creating these types of opportunities for people who would not necessarily have this opportunity. So this is really my driving force, because other than this, I would not do this business. It's really, really hard running a business that in a country that's totally different from yours. You don't understand the language, you don't understand the politics, you don't understand all the nuances, the taxes are crazy. So there are lots of things against me here, but I continue every day because this is my vision and this is the whole point of why I do what I do every day.
That sounds so inspiring, and that's part of the reason I want to do this podcast and have conversations with amazing people like you, because I feel that frustration. Obviously, there are certain levels that are the same and others that, the language barrier is one thing. But for me, I feel being a Black woman who doesn't have a husband, children, or who doesn't have the aspiration to have either one at this time, I feel judged.
Yes.
So listening to you, it just feels like a parallel to that conversation in another country. And do you have a support group? Do you have people that you speak to? Like, how do you find that outlet to express yourself and your frustration?
Yeah, so really, I do still very connected with my friends back home. So this is one thing that helps. So, like Jamila, as we spoke about earlier, she's my sounding board. So I generally call her like every other day shouting, Jamila, rescue me, So she is, the person that really keeps me grounded in everything that I do. I also have a good family support, but my family will never really understand what I do. But it's just to call them and realize that there's somebody else that checks for me, so it's great. In Israel, I do have a partner that I live with. I call him my husband, but we're not officially married because I did the marriage thing once, and I was like, okay, enough of this. I cannot do this again. As I told you, Israeli men are amazing fathers. They don't make the best partners, so I decided to keep it separate for a while. And so he helps me because he runs the administrative part of my business mostly. And so he helps, especially with the taxes and all these different, financial aspects of it. And, basically coaching me as well, how to negotiate with Israelis. Because, when you negotiate with the Middle Easterns, it's a whole different ball game than, talking to anybody else. That's why everybody loves selling to America, because they always say when you give Americans a price, they generally accept it. They don't really question it. Israelis will never accept the first price you give them. There's always a level of negotiation. So this was not something I was born with. So it was difficult for me in the beginning to understand how to get around this barrier. And then I also have a very good friend, Rory Branford, who owns a company in Trinidad as well, and some other companies as well. So being an entrepreneur himself, I lean on him a lot of times for advice about, how to do different things. So this is really my support network. And then I've been sort of intentional about surrounding myself with these similar people. So sometimes, just like how you and I connected on online, I would look for certain people like that online and befriend them. And before you know it, we become very good friends. And, they eventually will give me advice when I need it. So if there's a particular skill or particular advice I need, I know within my network who I can reach out to for that information, and they're more than willing to always share. So this is how I manage, basically.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a very good connection. I don't know what services I can offer, but I'm here if you need be.
Yeah, this is it. And sometimes, again, it's not just services, it's just having someone else to talk to who's going
Yes.
through the same thing. Lately I've been talking to a lot of Trinidadians who also own agencies like Lyndon Braffett. And, there's Jared that I follow a lot as well. And just hearing sometimes their frustrations and their stories, it's enough, because then when we have these conversations, we can help each other to figure out what to do better. Even like I had a talk the other day with Debbie Ann Jolly, who's also running an agency. And I say to Debbie, I say, how do you do this every day in Trinidad when, digital marketing is still something like a very new concept to most companies. And they are struggling really just to get that message across why they need to be online, right? So when I hear their struggles, I say to them, listen, and it's the same thing in Israel. In all this startup world that you think exists, you still have to convince a company why they need a CRM sometimes, because they're like, okay, what is this? What's the point? So, it's good to just hear that other people are experiencing the same thing and you're not alone. Because I think as entrepreneurs, this is the biggest problem. We always think we are alone and we're alone experiencing this. So the more we talk to other people and understand, hey, we're not alone and we can bring our brains together to figure out the solution, this is enough.
Yeah, and I think that's for us to have this discussion and to be able to put it out there to fellow people and listen. And I hope for those listening out there that, frustration over the experiences in entrepreneurship is not uncommon. And a lot of times we tend to think that outside is better. But based on what you're telling us, it's all a lie.
Exactly. It's definitely not always better. But, one thing I liked about Israel, because I said in the beginning, I love living here. And despite all the challenges, it's just that I find they still give you that space to be whoever you wish to be. And you can really do it, So the kind of obstacles they put in your place, for me, what I see, it's obstacles more of to challenge you to see if you have the strength or you have the character skills that you need to overcome these things. So it's not, you can actually see the fruit at the end of the rainbow, at the end of that tunnel. Sometimes I say to my colleagues back in Trinidad, I don't know how, if I would in Trinidad, I can do this because, again, there's such a long education process in Trinidad where companies are still not, focused or not really on board with this whole online marketing skills, But in Israel, the startup companies, at least, they know they need it. So this is the first thing. When an investor invests in a startup company, the next thing they want to see is their digital marketing plan. So they do come to you for that. But when I talk to the more industrial companies or the medical companies who have existed for more than 30 years, and they have existed doing field sales marketing, they're the ones that are harder to convince about going digital or using a CRM because they're like, hello, Excel is just as good as for me. I have everything in my head. My business runs fluently. Why do I need this? I made $57 million last year. Why do I need this system? So sometimes you have to go through the process with them about, your competitors are out there in digital, you're losing your market share. So you have to be more prepared for them. But, at least I have the balance here, and that really helps me to still go on every day and see the opportunities, So
Oh.
this is what makes me survive.
Well, that's comforting. Did you think that you would have been where you are now if someone had told you 14 years ago this is what you're going to be doing?
Hell no, Pauline. My plans were very, very different before I came to Israel. I studied in Mona in Jamaica campus in UWI, and my plan when I was in my final year was to learn Chinese. I was learning Chinese Mandarin because my goal was to move to China. I knew I always wanted to leave Trinidad and live somewhere different because I didn't want to live in a country that was, just typical New York or the London, because I'm like, there are too many Caribbean people there. You get sucked into the whole Caribbean culture and you forget to do something outside of the box sometimes. And that's how I felt a bit. So I was like, okay, I want to go somewhere very different with not so many Caribbean people, but I want to be able to contribute to my Caribbean people. So I thought Mandarin was the way because we were buying up so many things in China from China. China was investing so much. And I always realized that, every time a Chinese official spoke, they always had a translator, but we never had a translator to translate what they were saying. So they can tell us anything, but we could never really understand what they're saying. So this was my motivation to, study Mandarin and do that. And then I ended up in Israel. So it was total curveball.
So what advice would you give to somebody, especially now? I mean, you have quite a lot of layoffs due to the C word. And you may have some folks exploring entrepreneurship. But I want to take a flip side on that. And I want you to talk to people who are looking for employment, because entrepreneurship has become, this fancy dancy word that, people try to look down on others because they're not looking to start their own business. But I don't think everybody should be an entrepreneur. And with that said, for someone who's listening, because you mentioned earlier about the girls that you mentored in Nigeria, I believe it is, or Kenya?
Kenya, yes, from Kenya.
Kenya, yes. So, they now become, after they've done their degrees and study, they become employable to the world because they have access to the internet and can be paid. And for me, I've built my business. I actually had a meeting early on today with a new content creator, and she was concerned because she's heading out to Canada. And I said, that doesn't really interrupt our arrangement because we are in a World Wide Web. So what is your suggestion to that person who may be looking for a new job or, want to experience a new industry? What would you tell them when they start their search?
That's a very good question, Pauline. And, this is another thing that really differentiates how I built my business as well. For example, I don't hire employees. I always say to my colleagues that come in, you're not an employee. I don't want the 9-to-5 people who want to clock in at 9 to 5 and think that's the end of their day. And I don't want those people who are just looking for their salary at the end of the month. So I have a very strict structure about how I, build and take people into my company. And first of all, I hardly ever advertise for my positions either. I generally handpick the people I want to work with, and I make them actually want to work with me. So they have to be the ones really approaching me. And if I do approach someone, I do make them work harder to convince me that they deserve the job. And why it is I do it is because part of my structure is that I need to build thought leaders, because in marketing especially, you need people who really are passionate about the space and the topic, because you need them to set themselves up as thought leaders in that space. So for example, in Israel right now, if I'm on the train station or anywhere people see me, they call me the Hubspot girl. And I'm like, why am I the Hubspot girl when there are 27 other agencies out here? But it's because I have set up myself as a thought leader in this market, that I've done all these HubSpot workshops, and I always talk about HubSpot. People always see me as the HubSpot girl. So every other employee I came in, even these girls from Kenya, part of my ascension plan with them is to say, okay, what part of marketing do you like? If it's SEO, if it's social media, if it's event marketing, choose one, and I want you to deep dive and understand that passionately. You're going to write blogs about it, you're going to do videos about it, and anything you create is under your name. Because what most employees don't realize why they're losing their jobs today, it's because they haven't found a way to stand out from the other employees and really see how they're really contributing to that company's bottom line. So yes, the company, most people, especially, I come from a culture as well in Trinidad where I was like that when I was back then. I just cared about the salary at the end of the month. I could go and have coffee for half of the day and chit chat with my colleagues for the next half and barely do my work, because I could do my work within an hour, but I have to be there for 10 hours for the day. So, there was never enough work to pick up my space and my time in the office. But I wasn't, mature enough back then to think, okay, what else could I do to contribute to this company and make this organization successful? But now, seeing the experience I had in Israel and realizing that if I don't figure out how to contribute and make my mark, then I will become obsolete, and even more so as an entrepreneur. And you're right when you say that not everybody is meant to be an entrepreneur, because this is hard-ass work, and people don't realize that, they think it's all the nice, glorious name and everything, but it's one of the most humbling experiences you'll ever go through, because you will have some of the most, insulting exercises of people. You have to hear no so many more times. You can have, people dissing you, people, criticizing you. It's very humbling experience. If you don't have the balls to stomach it, it could be difficult for people who cannot deal with it. But on another note, just to really, hone down on your question, is that people, again, have to figure out, how do I stand out? How do I build myself in a thought leader position? And it doesn't matter what career you're in. It. You could be a civic engineer. You can be, a teacher. You can be anything. Like right now you're seeing teachers online, and some of them have managed to say, okay, I'm going to offer online courses and help your kids do their homework, or, put out information out there to help your kids get ready for C. If I was a teacher in Trinidad, this is what I would be doing. People on Facebook all day, they're not doing what they should be doing. But if I'm a teacher in Trinidad and I do some SCA videos to show people a 1-minute video, a 2-minute video, how to do this specific problem or how to solve something that they need to know, it would help, and it will help you stand out as an excellent teacher. That next thing you know, after this pandemic passes a bit, you could have people coming to you for private lessons, people who want to, hire you for your expertise. It will happen. So my point is, every type of career has an opportunity for people to stand out and be thought leaders and be different. And even as crowded as the space could seem, like in marketing today, there's still room for you to stand out, because a lot of people are still on the periphery, or there's always a little angle that you can do. So for example, as I keep telling you, in Israel, it's a very competitive space for digital marketing. I mean, there are 27 HubSpot agencies, but there are like 1,000 other marketing agencies. So companies get very, where do I begin? How do I choose you? And one of the things I did recently to stand out was to do content in Hebrew. And listen, I don't even speak Hebrew, okay? But I do have people on my team who do speak Hebrew. So I gave them the opportunity to manage a community on LinkedIn for HubSpot customers only in Israel, and all the content is in Hebrew. Now, nobody else was doing that, right? So the minute we start doing that, it grows our community, and it gives us the authority that we know what we're doing. So these are the simple edges and the simple things you can figure out how to do in your market and in your little job to keep you relevant and to create a new space for you.
Yeah, you weren't seeing it, but I was clapping and going, amen, hallelujah. That was my church, girl. That was my church. Because I have been going through my own internal things, trying to find new team members. And it has been quite an experience to learn how we underutilize technology. We like to complain, but a lot of us are not doing simple things to make ourselves more employable. And I cannot agree with you more.
Yeah. And people don't understand that companies are not going to be dime a dozen soon, and they really have to do it. And one of the industries, like one of my spin-offs now from my agency, which I'll share, is that I am actually going to build an agency in New York and make my agency in New York specializing only in e-commerce, because e-commerce is what's going to take off now. There would not be many more brick and mortar stores anymore. Everybody will have to figure out how to go digital, because this period showed every business they need to have a digital presence. And now they have to create more e-commerce experiences for people to shop online. So this is another thing that, will open up very soon, because they will need to understand how to now differentiate themselves and do better marketing to attract their relevant audience. So, there's so many things that will always be available. Like one podcast I listened to the other day says, most successful businesses were born during economic depressions. Uber, Walt Disney, all of these big companies were born during severe economic depression. So this is a great time for us to recreate ourselves, and even as an employee to figure out how we want to, contribute to this space right now and succeed. So it's just how we look at it and how we do the work, because this is going to count and, demand some of our work.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Hey, it's Pauline here. I have done so many attempts at this ad because I have to do this because my business is actually financing this podcast. It's the sponsor, monetary wise. And to me, none of the ads make sense. So I'm just going to do this so I can tell my accountant that this was a marketing spend. Check out @marketingcaribbean.com. If you want to know what we do, the fact that you're listening to this podcast means that we know what we do.
So let us talk about Resa, the mother. How is that work-life balance working out for you? How is that? Because I don't have small ones. I have a cat, so when he annoys me, I tell him, get away from me. So how is it for you in terms of balancing the entrepreneurship, motherhood, significant other partnerships? How is that?
So if my husbands actually listen to this podcast, they would be laughing their heads off, because they're like, what work-life balance is she talking about? So, but really, as I told you, my kids' fathers are very, very involved in their lives. So generally, they do the bulk of the work, and how I treat it now is like work-life integration. So one of the things I always tell, because Israel too has a lot of women who feel that being a wife and a mother must come first before themselves, And I don't dispute it. I guess everybody has their own way of looking at things. But if you have the ambition to be a career woman as well, you have to learn how to get your husbands more involved or your partners more involved in raising the kids. And this is something I've learned brilliantly, because I have seen my mother raise 3 kids on her own. Now, my dad was there and involved, but, they were separated and divorced, and she had the primary responsibility of growing us up, and we lived with her primarily and everything. I am not that kind of mother. I mean, when I got divorced from my first husband, I willingly gave him full custody of my daughter. Now, we have shared custody on paper, but my daughter lives with him, because he was in a stage where his career was more mature, and he can take time off, and he can be with her when she was sick from school. But I'm now starting to build my career. So I didn't have that luxury to be at home every other day when she's sick from school, or to take, holidays when Israel has 10,000 holidays a year, to be home all the time. So my point was that I got him very involved, and I said, my daughter will be okay. And she is one of the most, balanced kids you've ever met. So she's not suffering from not having my presence or not living with me, because I see her every week as usual, and every other weekend she's with me. But I don't have this guilt conscious that I'm not involved, because when she's with me, we have a good time, we do things together. But when she's not with me, this is her father's responsibility, and he's very involved and dotes upon her like she needs to be. So this is my advice to women. Stop feeling that you have to be superwoman and some superhero. It doesn't give you anything, because if you look at those men, they all go on with their lives and they do everything they're supposed to do for themselves. But we feel we must martyr ourselves because somehow somebody's going to give us a trophy at the end of it all. It's not going to happen. So we have to learn to put ourselves and our needs just as much as in the forefront as men do. And then we will see more balance and more integration, and our children will not die and will not turn out to be criminals because we're not present. I think more criminals are turned out because the mothers are too present and the fathers are not. So, have that balance and you'll see your life will change.
Wow, that is a strong opinion. That's
I
I
know.
get you.
Some of your
I feel
audience
you.
might be like, who is this criminal woman? Why is Pauline talking to her?
No, well, as you listen, and I hate to make this about me, but I mean, I am in the podcast. But I just, as you're talking, I'm reminiscing about my mom. I only recently discovered she had 6 children, and my father wasn't there for any one of our births in the hospital because he didn't like hospitals. So I
Can you
think that,
imagine?
no, I can't. That's why I'm just like, I'm listening to you, and I'm like, yes, yes.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
was my thing. I don't get these men getting off the hook. I'm sorry. If I had to suffer taking that child for 9 months and giving birth, the rest of the life is for you. That's what I tell them all the time, and they're always laughing. They're like, "What? So we must suffer 20 years for you going through birth for 1 minute and carrying a child for 9 months?" I'm like, "Yes, this is what I call balance. You know how much pain that was?"
as someone who's never birthed a child, I would hear your word for it, and I appreciate this different points of view.
Exactly.
Oh my God, that is amazing. So I also want to hear about what is your opinion on the Caribbean as it relates to how we are treating technology? Because as you referenced earlier, Israel is seen as the next Silicon Valley. I actually saw somebody post something on LinkedIn from the States saying they're moving to Israel, and I was like, what?
Mhm.
So, with that experience and environment around you, what have you seen and learned there that you think that we in the Caribbean need to adopt?
Oh my God, there's so many things. Could I just start with the army being mandatory? You know, some Israelis think that, in Israel, all the kids must serve the army, right? The women do 2 years, the men have to do 3 to 4 years. Depends on the unit they go to. But it's mandatory. If you don't serve the army, you end up in jail or you have to leave Israel and never come back. It's no argument. And I always thought this was the most beautiful thing. And I'll tell you why, Pauline. Israeli kids are mega spoiled, okay? Their mothers treat them like mini gods. They get them everything they want. And then, it's like they have no boundaries with these kids. These kids are the freest things you ever see. But suddenly they reach 18 and they have to go into an army service. And then at 21, when they come out, you won't believe the responsible young men and women that come out. Everybody now they go to university after that, they get married, and life goes on. There are no young boys sitting on the corners doing nothing with their lives. There are no people who are just trying to figure out and still living in their mother's house at the age of 30. None of that happens. And I always say the army is like the greatest disciplinarian because after your mother spoils you, then you go into a general shouting down your throat and you have no choice but to obey because they will put you in army jail or they will discipline you in harsh ways. So these boys and women turn into responsible adults after this. So this is one thing I always wondered, how can I bring this to the Caribbean? Because in my personal experience, I have a brother like that, who basically wants to do nothing with his life. He's comfortable just sitting at home, doing nothing and just pretending that this is life. And he's 30 something years now, still lives with his mother. So these kinds of things bother me. And I share this openly, personally, because I do know of so many cases like that among my friends I still talk to back home. They have brothers in the same situation. And I'm like, why are young men in Trinidad not more responsible, not more, being father-like? Even my brother who has kids, is he a real father to these kids? No. And this I find is a total breakdown because Israel believes a lot in family structure. And no matter what, this is something they take very seriously to keep together in a certain way. So they can keep the foundation of the society going. And when I look every day and I see all these murders going on in Trinidad and see all these things that happening that should not happen in a society as small as ours, it's heartbreaking. And it stems from the fact that we don't have those types of systems in place. So this is one thing on the personal level I want to share. But on an economic level, I'll tell you another thing that I've seen, but I've seen it kind of improved in the more recent years, like in the last 5 to 10 years in Trinidad, especially, and even in the Caribbean, is the whole attitude of entrepreneurship. And I mean, I went to a very good school. I went to St. Joseph's Convent, St. Joseph. But just the other day, I was looking around, and I think I was having this conversation with Jamila a couple months ago, and we said, out of all the people that come out of convent, how many of them really own businesses or really are the entrepreneurs today? No, most of them decide they're being especially the A students, right? All A students went and they looked for a good job. And you know, Robert Kiyosaki always says, C students will work for B students, C students will work for A students, and B students will become politicians, or A students will work for C students rather. Because the point is, A students always went out to be employees. They never, you know, went out to decide to become entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And this is something that, you know, the economy has to change, because in Israel, everybody who comes out of a special unit in the army or had any type of training that makes them think outside of the box, they're all entrepreneurs. That's why they have such a big and thriving startup economy. And if a country has to grow and a country has to survive, they have to have more innovation and they have to have more people who are willing to take those types of risks to create new things and create new inventions. It's not enough to just rely on external forces to provide jobs for you, because, you know, everybody thinks it's good enough to work with the oil companies. This is our biggest ambition sometimes in Trinidad, but look at what happens to the oil companies today. They're all failing. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. So where would you be? You know, when Petrotrin shut down, everybody was in shock. Oh my God, what would I do? But you had so much to do. You could recreate yourself, but you're not in that mindset to help recreate yourself. So this is something, you know, I'm loving to see how many people are taking chances now to be entrepreneurs in the Caribbean, because this is something that is so much needed for us to survive as a region and as a country.
Yeah, that is, yeah. I wasn't necessarily an A student at growing up. I actually went to school in Barbados to 𝐶𝐵. But I've hired many A students.
This is it, right? And you think you back in school, they always made you feel that you would be working for them, right? And now you realize, wait, they're all working for me. You see? So this is it.
It also takes a certain type of mindset and willingness to work hard, you know, and I think that's what you referenced earlier with the military, like that type of upbringing, and it levels the playing field in terms of experience as a population. So once that discipline is instilled, it just produces a higher level of people willing to take that risk. That is truly amazing to hear, though.
Yes, it is. It is. And it's a controversial topic because some Israelis don't like the army, but the point is you have no choice. So whether you like it or not, this is it, you know. And I think sometimes societies have to just have certain kind of mandatory things. So, because at the end of the day, it keeps the fabric of the society together. So I'm sorry, I would have an army in Trinidad tomorrow morning if I could. Send all those boys in that army, straighten them out, and bring them into men.
Hey, it's Pauline here to let you know about Regis. They have an amazing team in the Caribbean. They've been helping LinkedIn Local Caribbean from inception with locations in Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, and Guyana. I can assure you that is the place to go. As a small business owner, it's so important to have an alternative space outside of my home because the walls are closing in. Go check them out and tell them Pauline sent you.
It's to try things, right? And I think that's probably the failure of public sector. You're in such a public lighting, because I visited Shanghai and, you know, the perception and the brand of China is so westernized and it's in a negative light. But there's certain elements. You have so many people. I went to a propaganda museum and you're like, wow, I understand why. I don't agree, but I understand why. And I would never have experienced that if I just watched what was on YouTube or on television. So
exactly. And that takes us to another point of, you know, Caribbean people traveling beyond New York and London. They really need to experience more of those unusual countries. You know, like I saw your post about Shanghai and stuff, but I was always shocked, and I loved how you also, you know, you loved your triathlon training and all your bicycle riding, and you met people there who was also cycling. People lent you a bike and you're joining them. And this is what I love to see, because this is what we need to do more of, just opening up ourselves to other cultures and other people and just taking these chances, because without these experiences, how could we grow as a people, you know? Carnival is not the beginning and end of it all. Marshall is not the beginning and end of it all. I love my Marshall still, and I love my Carnival, but at the end of the day, I needed to expose myself to bigger things. And this is what we need to start doing more of as a people.
Don't even get me started with that. That will need another podcast because, as my friend rightfully told me the other day, he's like, Carnival is a new church, is a way to distract people from, things that they want to discuss. It's a new way to have a distraction instead of saying, these are problems we need to look after. But anyway, let's
I know, girl. It's a whole other podcast.
So let's talk about what it's like in terms of, okay, we're gonna put an imaginary scenario. You are head of CARICOM. CARICOM is supposed to be a combination of islands who are looking for a common goal to expand the economics of the Caribbean. You have been appointed the head. What would be the first thing you would do your first day at work? What would you focus on first?
Wow. Where do I begin, Pauline? How much time do I have?
One thing on the list.
One thing?
One thing on the list. I mean, obviously you want to fix a lot of things, but what would be the first thing at the top of your list to focus on?
I think, honestly, Caribbean people, we just need a little bit more unity. And we need to figure out how to bring us together more as one, Like I always go back to how the Federation collapsed, and I heard all these, conspiracy stories and the propaganda stories of who said what and when. So we won't get into all of that then, but it's such a shame that never happened, because I think what we didn't anticipate and realize back then is how the world was going to explode and where things were going to go. And if we were united as a region, I think we would be much stronger, and our economic power for bargaining would have been a little bit higher than it is right now as individual countries. Even going through this crisis right now in this pandemic period, it's like, what is the regional response for this? It's difficult for every country to always, operate on their own. Some islands are just simply too small to have any real impact, But there are gems and diamonds coming out of those islands. And if we could have formed a way to unite and really have those gems and diamonds, nurtured into something, the region would have been so much better off than it is today. So this is my thing. I would have just found that way to bring us together and take the best out of every island and really highlight it in a way that it would help us, appreciate each other more. Sometimes I still listen and I hear this competition between Trinidad and Jamaica, for instance. Everybody feel they're better than each other. And it's like, why? And we just still one people. So this is it.
I agree. And I think we can still magnify our uniqueness without trying to put down somebody else, And yes. I have grown up with it all my life. Growing up in Barbados with a Trinidad accent, coming back from Barbados to Trinidad with a Bajan accent because I went to school and like, why accent change? I'm like, 'cause I'm 10.
I know, right?
And this back and forth. I agree with you completely on unity. And I have one last question for you. How influential do you believe your Caribbean upbringing has brought you to where you are today?
Oh my, so much. You don't understand. Listen, I could not survive if I didn't have the upbringing I had. And, sometimes, we joke here that not many Trinidadians could survive in Israel. And I could totally understand why. But, I think my father's influence in my life helped a lot, in Israel, because my father is like the coolest, calmest man you'll ever meet. He never seems to get angry for anything. Everybody's his friend. He will, be driving on the road and shouting hello to everyone. And I used to be like, as a child, why are you saying hello to the man, Daddy? He doesn't know you. So why are you saying hello? But he was the friendliest and the most open guy ever. Everybody wanted to be in his company. And one thing I admired about him as well is that he never took offense to anything. You can tell him the worst thing, you can tell him the worst insult. It's as if he just rolled off his back. And when I moved to Israel, this is something I had to learn, because the first year I came to Israel, I cried every day. I couldn't understand why these Israelis were shouting at me all the time and why they said the worst things at me all the time. But the thing about Israelis is that, first of all, Hebrew is a very harsh language. So when they translate from Hebrew to English, it always sounds harsher than it means because they don't have nuances like please or may I or can I. It's just like, give it to me, why this? And it sounds very harsh. So when they translate to English, they do it just as the way they will speak in Hebrew, which is allowed in Hebrew, but in English, you need the niceties to make it sound good. And then secondly, they're very straightforward. Israelis do not mince words to tell you what they think about you or if you did something wrong. They instantly tell you. And I used to be like, okay, but in Trinidad, we tend to beat around the bush before we tell somebody something or get to the point. In Israel, they don't waste time, right? So they tell you as it is. And I used to be like, okay, but you could have said that nicer. You could have, toned it down a bit. They don't have that time. So, but with my father's upbringing, eventually I realized, you have to just, first of all, take things as it is and let it roll off your back, because at the end of the day, don't take it personal became my motto, because people don't really think about you as much as you think they think about you. So eventually you would just move on with your life and they would move on with their lives. And 5 minutes after, literally, they would ask you to come and have lunch with them after cussing you out. So this is how, fast they get over things. So I had to learn, I learned that, but it helps me because of my upbringing, of how I was brought up to do that. And then, I think from my mother's side, I really got her ability to be very resourceful. My mother could make everything look good in a second or spin everything around into such positivity. So for me, that helped me as well to just realize that nothing is the end of the world. If I wanted to get a certain position or a certain job, I can do it. I can change myself around. I can, do things differently. I don't have to stick in the same, path and doing the same thing all the time. And I can always find a way to make this work.
Wow. Well, on that note, I think that has definitely been another form of inspiration. So if anybody wants to find you, where should they go?
Same place you found me, Pauline. That's the place I'm most active on, LinkedIn, where we found each other, rather. So yeah, LinkedIn is the easiest and the most effective place to find me. I'm also on Facebook as well, but I don't ever see Facebook messages. If anybody messages me there, I would not see it. But I always see my LinkedIn messages. And just check me out there anytime, and we're happy to connect and happy to, help anyone, if they need more advice about anything, feel free to reach out.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thanks for joining us this week. Make sure to subscribe in iTunes, Google Podcast, or wherever you listen for your podcasts. Don't forget to join the community at our website, LinkedInLocalCaribbean.com. If you liked this show, you might want to check out our next LinkedIn Local event by following the hashtags on LinkedIn. Search for hashtag LinkedIn Local Caribbean.